I need you to understand something right up front. I don't camp anymore. Not after what happened at Whisper Creek last October. And when people ask me why, I just tell them I've gotten too old for sleeping on the ground. It's easier than explaining the truth. There were 5 of us that weekend. Me, my brother Jake, and 3 guys from work. Marcus, Dev, and this kid named Tyler, who just started at the firm. Tyler had been going on for weeks about how he'd never been camping, never even left the city limits of Chicago for more than a day trip. So we figured we'd show him what he was missing. Drive up to Wisconsin, find a decent spot, drink some beers, tell some stories, normal guy stuff. We found a clearing about 2 miles off the main trail. Perfect setup. Ring of stones for the fire, flat ground for tents, and a creek running close enough to hear but not so close we'd be dealing with mosquitoes all night. We got there around 4 in the afternoon, had camp set up by 6, and the fire going strong by 7:30. The thing about campfires is they create this bubble of civilization in the middle of nowhere. Inside that circle of light, you're still part of the modern world. Beyond it, you're in something older, something that doesn't give a damn about your smartphone or your college degree. We were on our 3rd round of beers when Marcus started telling this story about his ex-girlfriend's crazy roommate. He was doing voices, gesticulating wildly, and we were all losing it. Jake was laughing so hard he nearly fell backwards off his log. Even Dev, who never laughed at anything, was grinning. That's when we heard it. At first, I thought it was an echo. Marcus had just delivered his punchline and we were all roaring. Then, from somewhere out in the dark, there came this sound. Laughter. But it wasn't quite right. It was like someone had recorded us laughing and played it back on a speaker with a dying battery. The pitch was off. Too high, then too low. The hell was that? Tyler asked, his smile fading. We went quiet, listening. The fire popped and crackled. The creek burbled in the distance. Nothing else. Probably just an echo of the rocks, Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Marcus picked up another story, something about his boss, and we tried to get back into it. But the mood had shifted. We were still smiling, still trying to laugh, but we kept glancing toward the tree line. Then Marcus hit another punchline, and again, the laughter came back to us. Except this time, it was clearly coming from 5 different locations. 5 distinct voices, all laughing at slightly different intervals. One from the left, near where the trail met our clearing. One from behind us, deeper in the forest. 3 more scattered around our camp in a loose semicircle. And here's the thing that made my skin crawl. They were mimicking us. I could pick out the approximation of my own laugh, that snorting thing I do when something really gets me. Jake's wheeze, Marcus's booming guffaw, Dev's quiet chuckle, even Tyler's nervous giggle. Okay, that's not funny, Tyler said, standing up. Which one of you assholes set this up? None of us had. We all knew it, but nobody wanted to say it. Could be hikers, Dev offered, playing a prank. At night? 2 miles off the main trail? I shook my head. No way. We sat there in silence for maybe 5 minutes. The fire was our whole world now. Everything beyond its light was potential threat. Then Jake, trying to break the tension, told a quick joke. A stupid one-liner we'd all heard before. Nobody laughed. But out in the forest, 5 voices did. They laughed exactly the way we would have. I heard my laugh, Jake's laugh, all of them. Perfectly synchronized this time. like they'd been practicing, like they were getting better at being us. "We need to leave," Marcus whispered. "Right now." Tyler was already moving toward his tent. "I'll pack my... Psst. Stop." I grabbed his arm. The word came out harder than I meant it to. "Listen." The laughter had stopped, but it had been replaced by something worse. Footsteps. Lots of them, moving through the dry leaves. Not trying to be quiet, not hurrying, just walking in a slow, deliberate circle around our camp, staying just beyond the firelight. We could see shapes now, silhouettes that were almost the right proportions to be human. Almost. They moved wrong, though, with a kind of stuttering gait, like stop-motion animation. Then one of them spoke. It used my voice. "We sat around the campfire laughing," it said, and the other four joined in, creating this horrible chorus until the forest started laughing back in 5 different voices. They knew the title of what was happening to us, like they'd done this before, like they were narrating our story. We ran, left everything, tents, gear, food, and everything, and just bolted down the trail using our phone flashlights. We didn't stop until we hit the parking lot. When we finally piled into Marcus's truck, the sun was just starting to color the horizon. None of us have talked about it since. Not really. Sometimes Jake will start to bring it up over beers, then think better of it. But I still hear them sometimes when I'm in quiet places. That perfect mimicry of my own laugh, coming from just outside whatever circle of safety I've made for myself. And the worst part? I don't think they were trying to hurt us. I think they were just lonely, trying to join in, trying to be human. That somehow makes it so much worse. The ranger had warned us about the bears. That's what I keep coming back to. He'd been very specific. Don't leave food in your tent, hang your packs from a tree at night, and if you hear something moving around outside after dark, stay put and make noise. Let them know you're human. He didn't say anything about what to do if your friend disappears and comes back wrong. This was supposed to be a simple overnight trip. Me and Connor had known each other since community college, and we'd been planning this hike for months. The Porcupine Mountains in Upper Michigan. Moderate difficulty, beautiful scenery, far enough from civilization to feel like an adventure, but not so remote we'd die if something went wrong. We made it to our campsite by 3 o'clock. It was this perfect little spot beside Lake of the Clouds with a view that looked like something out of a postcard. We set up the tent, filtered some water, made sandwiches. Connor was in a great mood. He'd just gotten engaged the month before, and he kept showing me pictures of rings on his phone, asking if I thought Sarah would actually like it or if she was just being nice. Around 7, as the sun was starting to sink, Connor stood up and stretched. "Fire's getting low," he said. "I'll grab some more wood. There's a bunch of dead branches about 50 yards that way." He pointed toward a cluster of birch trees at the edge of the clearing. "You want company?" I asked, but I was already getting comfortable in my camp chair. "Nah, I'll be 5 minutes. Keep an eye on the food." I watched him walk off, his orange jacket bright against the darkening forest. He was whistling something. I think it was that one eagle song he was always humming. Then the trees swallowed him up, and I went back to my book. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I called out his name a few times, but the forest just absorbed my voice and gave nothing back. The wind had picked up, making the trees whisper and hiss. I told myself he'd probably just gone further than he'd planned, found a good haul of deadwood, and was hauling it back. But 45 minutes in, I was starting to worry. The sun had fully set by then, and our camp was this little island of firelight in a sea of darkness. I'd been calling Connor's name every couple of minutes, getting no response. That's when I heard his voice. "Hey, Matt, can you help me out here?" It was coming from the direction he'd gone. Relief washed over me and I grabbed my flashlight. "Connor, where are you, man?" "Near the tent." "Can you let me in? My hands are full of wood and I can't get the zipper." I swung my flashlight toward our tent. Nothing. The entrance flap was closed, exactly how we'd left it. "Connor, I don't see you. Where?" "Right here, dude. Come on. It's cold." His voice was definitely coming from near the tent, but my flashlight beam showed nothing but fabric and grass. No Connor, no wood. "Connor, this isn't funny. Where are you actually?" "I'm right outside the tent." "Just open it up." Something was wrong with how he said it. The words were right, but the rhythm was off. Like someone reading a script phonetically in a language they didn't understand. "If you're at the tent, why can't I see you?" I asked, moving closer but keeping my distance. "It's dark. Just open the tent, Matt." "Why do you need me to open it? Just unzip it yourself." Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe he'd left. Then, "My hands are full of wood." "You just said that. Where's the wood? I don't see any wood." Another pause. "Please let me in the tent, Matt. It's cold out here." The way he said my name, it was Connor's voice exactly. Same tone and timbre he always used. But there was something mechanical about it, like it was being played from a recording. "Connor, if that's you, tell me something only you would know. What's your fiance's middle name?" "Sarah." "That's her first name. What's her middle name?" "Please let me in the tent." My blood went cold. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Connor. It was something using his voice like a lure. I backed away from the tent, keeping my flashlight trained on the entrance. The fabric wasn't moving. There was no shadow, no indication that anything was actually there. "Matt?" The voice had moved. Now it was coming from the other side of our camp, near the food packs we'd hung. "Where'd you go, buddy? Did you find more wood?" It was asking me questions as Connor, trying to maintain the illusion. "I'm going to burn the fire bright and wait until morning," I said to the darkness, my voice shaking. "And then I'm leaving. You hear me? I'm not letting you in anything." "But Matt, I'm cold." The voice came from behind me now. I spun around and my flashlight caught something at the edge of the clearing. It might have been a person standing very still. It might have been a deer. It might have been a tree. The shadows were playing tricks, and I wasn't about to investigate. I fed that fire everything I could find for the next 6 hours. Every stick, every piece of garbage that would burn, even one of my socks when I started running low. All night long, Connor's voice called to me from different locations. Sometimes asking to be let in. Sometimes asking where I'd gone. Sometimes just saying my name over and over. The worst was around 3 a.m. when it started reciting things Connor had said to me earlier that day. Word-perfect quotes from our conversations delivered in his exact cadence. Like something had been listening, learning. When the sun finally came up, I packed everything at a dead sprint and hiked the 8 miles back to the parking lot in under 3 hours. Didn't stop, didn't look back. The rangers found Connor 4 days later, 15 miles from our campsite. He was dehydrated and confused, with no memory of where he'd been or how he'd gotten there. He said the last thing he remembered was collecting firewood, then waking up beside a completely different lake with the sun rising. I never told him about the voice. What would be the point? But sometimes, late at night, I get a text from Connor's number. Just 3 words. Let me in. I've checked with him. He's never sent them. My dad used to say that every story gets smoother with retelling, like a river rock. The rough edges wear off, the parts that don't work get dropped, and eventually you're left with something that barely resembles what actually happened. I never understood what he meant until that night at Lost Hollow. It was a bachelor party camping trip, which should have been my first clue that something would go sideways. 8 guys, too much whiskey, and my buddy Eric's insistence that we camp at some spot his grandfather used to take him to back in the 70s. None of us had seen Eric this excited about anything since his divorce was finalized, so we all went along with it. Lost Hollow was about 40 minutes off the highway, down a logging road that hadn't been maintained in at least a decade. We set up camp in this bowl-shaped clearing surrounded by old-growth pines. The weird thing was how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of wind moving through the branches high above us. We got the fire going as the sun dropped below the tree line, and after a couple hours of drinking and general bullshitting, somebody, I think it was Polly, said we should tell ghost stories. You know, like when we were kids. Eric went first. He told the story about a hitchhiker on Route 61 who turned out to be a ghost. It was a classic. The girl in the white dress, the borrowed jacket left on a tombstone, all that. He told it well too, real theatrical, lowering his voice at the right moments, making eye contact with each of us around the fire. When he finished, we all gave appreciative murmurs. Then, from somewhere outside the circle of firelight, a voice said, "That's not how it happened." It was a woman's voice. Older, with a raspy quality like she'd smoked for 40 years. We all froze. 8 grown men, suddenly remembering we were miles from the nearest house. "Hello?" Eric called out. "Is someone there?" No response, just the wind in the pines. "Probably a hiker," Dave said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Lady, you okay out there? Need help?" Nothing. We waited, listening hard. I was just starting to convince myself we'd imagined it when Polly cleared his throat and started telling another story. This one was about a guy who picked up a severed hand on the side of the road, and it ended up being cursed or something. Typical campfire fare. When he finished, the voice came again. Closer this time, maybe 15 feet from where I was sitting. "That's not how it happened." "Okay, what the hell?" Eric stood up, grabbing his flashlight. "Lady, you need to either come into the light or move along. You're freaking us out." He swept his beam across the trees. The light caught nothing but bark and shadows. "Maybe we should head back to the cars," I suggested. "And drive drunk on that road? Hell no." Eric sat back down. "She's probably just some weird hermit messing with us. We outnumber her 8 to 1. Looking back, the fact that we stayed says everything about male pride and how stupid it makes us. Dave told the next story. It was about a vengeful spirit that haunted an old asylum, killing teenagers who broke in to party. Real derivative stuff, but Dave sold it with this intensity that actually made it pretty creepy. This time, the voice didn't wait for him to finish. "That's not how it happened. Do you want to know how it really happened?" We all looked at each other. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Finally, Eric called out, "Sure, tell us how it really happened." I don't know what I expected. Maybe more silence. Maybe laughter. What I didn't expect was for the woman to start talking. She told us a story about the hitchhiker on Route 61. But in her version, the girl wasn't a ghost. She was running from her father, who'd been abusing her for years. The driver who picked her up wasn't some good Samaritan. He was worse than her father. She never made it home. They found her body 3 weeks later in a drainage ditch. The man who killed her died of old age, surrounded by family, never charged with anything. The way she told it, with specific dates and names and details, it didn't sound like a campfire story. It sounded like a police report, like something that had actually happened. When she finished, none of us spoke. The fire crackled and popped. Then she started on the second story, Polly's story about the severed hand. In her version, it wasn't cursed. It belonged to a migrant worker who'd been murdered by the farm owner for asking about unpaid wages. The hand wasn't found on the side of the road by accident. It was dumped there. And nobody ever looked for the rest of him. She went through every story we told, one by one. And in every case, her version was darker, more real, stripped of anything supernatural or comforting. Just human cruelty and injustice dressed up in different clothes. By the time she got to Dave's asylum story, I was feeling sick. Not scared, not exactly. Something worse than that. It was like she was pulling back a curtain we'd all agreed to keep closed. The asylum burned down because of faulty wiring, she said. 12 patients died. They were chained to their beds because it was cheaper than hiring enough staff to watch them properly. 7 were under the age of 16. The owners collected the insurance money and retired to Arizona. There was no vengeful spirit, just children burning alive in the dark, screaming for help that never came. "Jesus Christ," Dave whispered. "Stop. Just stop." "Why?" The voice had moved again. It was behind me now. "You wanted ghost stories. You wanted to be scared, but you don't want to hear about real horror. Real horror doesn't have rules. Real horror doesn't punish the guilty and spare the innocent. Real horror is random and meaningless, and it happens every day, and you can't banish it with salt or iron or prayers." I turned around slowly, shining my flashlight toward the voice. There was nothing there, just trees and darkness. "What do you want?" Eric asked. "I want you to stop lying," the voice said. "Stop making evil into entertainment. Stop turning real suffering into bedtime stories that let you sleep at night." "We're just having fun," Polly said. "We don't mean anything by it." That's the problem. The fire went out, not gradually, just gone, like someone had thrown a blanket over it. We were plunged into total darkness, 8 flashlight beams swinging wildly around the clearing. "Car keys!" somebody shouted. "Now!" We stumbled back to the vehicles like a herd of spooked cattle. I've never sobered up so fast in my life. Eric drove despite being over the limit because staying there wasn't an option anymore. We didn't talk about it afterward. Not really. But I think about it constantly. About how we tell stories about the supernatural because the real world is too horrible to face head-on. About how we make monsters out of ghosts and demons because we can't admit that people, regular people, are capable of so much worse. I looked up the stories she mentioned. The hitchhiker on Route 61, the migrant worker, the asylum fire, they all happened exactly the way she said they did. I don't tell ghost stories anymore. I want to be clear about something from the start. I'm not someone who believes in the paranormal. I'm an engineer. I deal in measurable reality, in cause and effect, in things that can be tested and verified. So when I tell you what happened at Blackwood Ridge, I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm just telling you what I saw. There were 4 of us on that trip. Me, my cousin Ray, and 2 guys from his National Guard unit, Thomas and Deshaun. They'd just gotten back from a deployment and wanted to spend a long weekend somewhere without concrete or crowds. Ray suggested Blackwood Ridge because he'd camped there as a teenager and remembered it being nice and isolated. Isolated it definitely was. We didn't see another soul on the trail. It was early October, past peak camping season, and the weather forecast was calling for temps in the low 40s overnight. Most people had sense enough to stay home. We clearly didn't. The campfire was Ray's pride and joy. He'd spent a solid hour arranging the logs just so, creating this perfect teepee structure that burned hot and steady. By 9 p.m., we were all gathered around it, warm despite the cold wind cutting through the trees. We'd been trading stories for the last hour. Nothing spooky, just funny deployment stories from Thomas and Deshawn, and embarrassing family memories from Ray. I was mid-sentence, telling them about the time Ray got his head stuck in a banister when we were kids, when the fire just stopped. I don't mean it went out gradually, or that the wind blew it out, or that it flickered and died. I mean, 1 second it was burning strong, and the next second it wasn't. Like someone had hit a light switch. The logs were still there, arranged exactly as they had been. But there was no flame, no embers, no heat. Just cold wood sitting in a ring of stones. The hell? Deshawn stood up, shining his phone light at the fire pit. How does a fire just stop like that? It doesn't, Ray said. He sounded uneasy. That doesn't happen. We stood there staring at it for maybe 15 seconds, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. Then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, the fire was back. Same height, same intensity, like nothing had happened. And there was someone sitting on the log across from me. He was wearing old-style camping gear, canvas jacket, wool cap, leather boots that looked like they'd been made before Gore-Tex was invented. Older guy, maybe 65 or 70, with a weathered face and white stubble. He was staring into the fire like he'd been there the whole time, like he belonged there more than we did. All 4 of us jumped back simultaneously. Ray actually yelped. Thomas and Deshawn, both of whom had combat experience, moved into flanking positions instinctively. "Who the fuck are you?" Thomas demanded. The old man didn't look up from the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "Just warming myself. Gets cold up here this time of year." "Where did you come from?" Ray asked. His hand was on his hunting knife. "Been here a long time," the old man said. "Longer than you'd believe." "That's not an answer," Deshawn said. "You need to identify yourself now." The old man finally looked up at us. His eyes reflected the firelight in a way that seemed wrong. Too bright, too steady, like a cat's eyes in headlights. "Name's Walker. Henry Walker. Used to guide folks through these mountains back before they made it all a state park." "How'd you get here without us seeing you?" I asked. "We've been sitting here for 2 hours." "Maybe you just weren't looking," Henry said. He smiled, showing too many teeth. "People miss a lot when they're caught up in their own stories." "Bullshit," Thomas said. "There's 4 of us. One of us would have seen you approach." Henry shrugged. And yet, we stood there in this tense standoff, the fire crackling between us. Part of me was already trying to rationalize it. Maybe he'd been sitting there before the fire went out, and somehow we'd all failed to notice him in the split second of darkness. But that didn't make any sense. The logs hadn't shifted. Nobody had moved. "You boys seem tense," Henry observed. "Sit down. No need for all this hostility." "I think you should leave," Ray said firmly. "This is our campsite." "Is it?" Henry looked around the clearing. "Funny thing about places like this, you camp here for a night, maybe 2, then you leave. But some of us, we never leave. This is our campsite. Has been for a very long time. What's that supposed to mean? Deshaun asked. Henry poked at the fire with a stick that I swear hadn't been there a moment ago. It means I've sat at this fire 1,000 times with 100 different groups of campers. They all think they're the first ones here, the only ones here, but they're just passing through, temporary visitors to a place that belongs to those of us who stay. You're not making any sense, old man, Thomas said. No? Let me ask you something. Henry looked directly at me. When the fire went out, for that moment when there was no light, did any of you feel like you were alone? Like the others had disappeared? My skin went cold. Because yes, in that instant of darkness, I had felt utterly alone. Like I was the only person in the entire forest. From the looks on their faces, the others had felt it too. I thought so, Henry said softly. That's what it's like for us, for those who stay. We're always here, but only sometimes are we visible. The fire going out, that's when we slip through, when the boundary gets thin enough for us to join you. This is insane, Ray said. You're just some weird hermit trying to mess with us. Am I? Henry stood up. He moved like someone much younger, no stiffness in his joints. Then explain how I got here. Show me my footprints in the dirt. Show me where I walked from. We looked. There was nothing. The ground around the fire was soft earth and pine needles, and it showed our footprints clearly. But where Henry had been sitting, where he'd walked, nothing. Like he weighed nothing, like he wasn't really there. I think we should go, I said quietly. Right now. Good idea, Deshaun agreed. We started backing away from the fire, keeping our eyes on Henry. He didn't try to follow us. He just sat back down on the log and stared into the flames. You'll come back, he called out as we scrambled to pack our tents. Maybe not here, maybe not this year, but you'll camp somewhere remote, somewhere old, and you'll build a fire. And one night, that fire will go out for just a moment. And when it comes back on, we didn't stick around to hear the rest. We hiked out by flashlight, stumbling over roots and rocks, not caring about the noise we made. It took us 3 hours to reach the parking lot, and we drove straight through the night back to civilization. I've told myself 100 different explanations. Shared hallucination, carbon monoxide, some elaborate prank, but none of them fit quite right. Last month, I was at a friend's cabin in Vermont. We built a fire in his backyard pit, sitting around telling stories, drinking beer, everything normal. Then, around midnight, the fire went out, just for a second, just long enough for me to feel that crushing sense of isolation, that certainty that I was utterly alone in the dark. When it came back on, everyone was still there. All my friends, exactly where they'd been. But for just a moment, I could have sworn there was someone else sitting across from me. Someone in an old canvas jacket staring into the flames. I don't go camping anymore. And I'm very careful about what fires I sit beside.